with us? I don't see her.
She's with you, but her camera is off.
Oh, she's on the phone. We'll wait just a second for her to finish.
Yeah, and I don't believe Meg is going to be here tonight. Unfortunately, their little Ella's got appendicitis, is going into surgery here shortly.
Oh, wow.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Not good.
No. Okay, now we're ready to move. It's 5 o'clock, so we'll call the organizational meeting of the Orono Town Council to order. And I'd like to welcome everyone tonight or this afternoon with a special welcome to our new council members, Jeff Wingard and Laura Mitchell, and our new RSU director, Patrick Rowe. And I think Patrick is still in the attendees and not as a panelist, so I'm not sure that we want to get switched before we do the swearing in. Okay. So I guess the next item on our agenda is swearing in of school board members. There's Patrick. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you.
And we have our, excuse me.
The town clerk needs to be moved in as a panelist to be able to do this. I'm sorry.
She was here a second
She
ago.
was just here. She must have popped out. I will re-panelist her.
Belle, are you in a tin can somewhere?
We are trying to do this with 3 of us on the same call in a small office, so
Okay.
all weird microphones.
And we will turn the swearing in of the school board members to our town clerk. And
Hello, good
welcome.
evening. Yes, thank you, Tom. It looks like from the gallery view, Patrick is the only one present at this time.
That's what I have.
Okay, so Patrick, would you like to raise your right hand, please? Do you, Patrick Rowe, swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and of this state, so long as you shall continue to be a citizen thereof?
Yes.
And do you also swear that you will faithfully discharge to the best of your abilities the duties incumbent upon you as an RSU number 26 school board member according to the Constitution and the laws of this state?
Yes.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Patrick.
Thank you very much.
And we'll move on to swearing in of council members. Shelley.
Yes, and so this is going to be done as a collective oath with the parties. Those would be Laura Mitchell, Cheryl Robertson, Tom, yourself, and I also have Jeffrey Wingard. So if everyone is ready to go, let's raise our right hand. Do you all swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and of this state, so long as you all continue to be citizens thereof?
I do.
You do, I do.
Okay. Do you also swear that each of you will faithfully discharge to the best of your abilities the duties incumbent upon you each as Orono Town Council members according to the Constitution and the laws of this state?
I do.
I do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, folks.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
Shelley.
Shelley. Appreciate it.
Yes.
And mazel tov to all 4 of you.
Thanks. So we'll move on to the official roll call. And the official roll call shows that all council members are present except for Megan Gardner, who is absent due to a family emergency. And council acknowledgements. We'll go through the acknowledgement section, and let's start with Cheryl Robertson.
Hi, yeah, I would like to once again acknowledge, as we just came off an election, our staff and everything that went into that. I think I pre-acknowledged them first. Now I'm post-acknowledging them. And also, I'd like to acknowledge my council member friend, Terry Greenier, who stood out and delivered cupcakes. Or we passed out cupcakes Sunday, was it,
Nice.
Terry? To local people and to even some people who said they weren't from Orono, and we said, that's okay. You can have a cupcake. So that was fun. So happy birthday, Orono, and to all of you who got cupcakes.
Thank you. Our new member, Laura Mitchell, do you have any acknowledgements to make?
Just thank you as well to staff for pulling off another election in the pandemic, maybe their third at this point, and just happy to be here.
Thanks, Laura. Jeff Wingard.
Sure, I'd also like to thank the staff and in particular the volunteers and many people who came out to vote. And yeah, I am also thrilled and happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Welcome. And Terry Grenier.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Cheryl said. It was a fun day to hang out. Mitch and I had quite a few laughs. It was a good time to just be a counselor and go out and try to convince people that the cupcakes were free. So that's what I'd like to say.
Thanks, Terry. And Laurie Osha.
Hi, all. Yes, thanks to the staff for a great election, and thanks to all the people who voted. Really impressive turnout for a March election. It's a wonderful thing for democracy that we have such participation in our community. And I would like to acknowledge the tribal nation on whose lands we are situated. I encourage you all to look out the window and join me in honoring the Penobscot Nation. I'm grateful for their leadership as continuing stewards of the land and waters where we all live. I acknowledge their sovereignty and hope that we as a town council can work in concert with them to improve our town's justice and equity towards the tribal community members.
Thank you, Laurie. I'd like to acknowledge all the candidates who tossed their hat in the ring this March and ran for an office, a municipal office. For those folks that did not get elected, there are lots of opportunities to serve the community. There are lots of different committees and boards that the town council appoints, and I would encourage you to contact the town office and see what opportunities are available that you might want to take advantage of. Okay, that ends our official organizational meeting. We are going to move into a workshop session, but we'll adjourn our official organizational meeting first. So I'll take a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Thank you. And let's do it by a wave of hands, all those in favor of adjourning. So we're going to stay right on this Zoom call and move into a workshop. And again, the workshop roll call shows that all members are present. And the next item on our workshop agenda is council practices and policies review of council manual. I'm sure everybody received this nicely bound with a nice cover on it manual, and we're not going to go through it page by page. I would like to highlight a couple of new parts of it and a couple of sections that I think are especially important, but we're going to ask everybody to review it. For all of the incumbent council members, we've been through this before, except for the additional sections. And for those of you who are new to us, a good opportunity to get a good idea of what we're all about. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask town manager, myself, or any other council member. The first edition is on page 3. And on page 3, under the section of culture, the second paragraph is an addition to this document. And that reflects the work that the council has recently been doing on the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that's a nice addition, and I just want to point that out for you. The next section I would like to point out for you is on page 11. And I'm just assuming that folks have these available. And on page 11, we go into a fair amount of discussion on interaction with town staff, council manager, form of government, town council, non-interference. I think those are especially relevant sections in council manager relationship over on page 12, especially for our new members. Jeff, I know that you've had experience on the RSU board, and I'm sure that the same kind of relationship exists between board members and the superintendent, that our superintendent, our town manager is responsible for the day-to-day operation of the town, responsible for the hiring, supervision, and termination of employees. And we are responsible for policy making. And making sure that we have a good town manager, which we're fortunate to have. So again, I would just emphasize to our new members that that's a section that you want to really pay some attention to, and don't hesitate to bring up questions if you have any. On page 23, we did add some language under proclamations and resolutions. This is not new language. This is language that's been accepted by the council, but it was not in our handbook. So that just talks about how we process proclamations and resolutions. We sometimes get approached for these, and we decided we needed to have some guidelines on them. And that is a section that addresses that issue. And finally, in the back of the book, I believe it is the first, it's Appendix B, meeting ground rules. I would like to spend a little time on that section. This is a draft. This is not a finished document. Yes.
I just have a question, excuse me.
Sure.
There's a section, and I'm forgetting what page it's on, but I had a question about counselors talking to each other outside of meetings.
Yeah.
And just, can somebody define the rules a little bit in more detail? And maybe this is something that should happen outside of a meeting, and just tell me that.
No, good question. Sophie, do you want to take that?
I will. So the general rule of thumb is that the work of the council is supposed to be done in public, in the view of the public. So when you have 3 counselors come together, even though it's not a quorum of council, it does constitute a public meeting under Maine's public meeting laws. So it has to be appropriately noticed, and the public has to have an opportunity to either be there, or if it is an emergency, to give notice to the media so that people know that the meeting happened. So if you happen to be having a meeting with Councillor Robertson and Councillor Wingard about what plants to plant in your garden, go for it. Have as much social interaction as you want. Nobody can say anything about that. If you want to have a conversation about the big topic that's coming up on the next council agenda, you can talk one-on-one with people if you want to, but you cannot pull more than 2 people together in a conversation. And even when you do one-on-one, I would just caution you to remember the intent of the right to know law is for decisions to be made in public. So if you talk to every single counselor about something, you should probably disclose at least the thought process that went on, how you got from point A to point B in your decision making. But it shouldn't be. So when I first got here, there was a process where the manager called each counselor before the meeting, before the regular monthly meeting, and had a conversation with them. I stopped that practice because I was concerned that we were having meetings before the meeting, that we were getting too much discussion going on behind the scenes. So helpful at all?
So a one-on-one conversation is okay as long gathering maybe opinions and perspectives, but not, I'm voting this direction on it.
Yeah, and definitely not, I've talked to 5 others and they think this way. I'm going to, you know what I mean? It's definitely not about polling people ahead of time, but I think one-on-one conversations to understand and talk through a perspective is perfectly fine. You have 6 other people who are in the very unique position you are, and will have a different perspective than anybody else would have.
And then what about with constituents? A one-on-one or a one-on-several conversation? What do the limitations look like for that?
So from the right to know perspective, you could do that as much as you want. From our council perspective, if it's around council items, I think you can do that as much as you want. What we ask is if it's around day-to-day operations, that comes to me or through me, or that you at least make sure you have the right information before you talk about specific operations, so that we give one consistent and factually correct answer out there.
But gathering a resident's perspective or several residents' perspective at one time on a particular issue is totally fine to philosophically find out where they're positioned.
Absolutely.
I would argue that's part of your job.
Right. Yep. Just want to be very clear. At
And
the
I would
very
add-
beginning.
I would add
Okay.
too, Laura, that sometimes that happens through email, so that you get called, and my practice is to just either CC my answer to Sophie so that she knows what's going on, or forward the whole thing over. You'll get emails to all of us and not to Sophie, which happens a lot. So I always try to find, and usually Sophie's already in the loop before I get to her anyway. So it's often a moot point, but a lot of conversation does happen through email, and so that, but it's easy to manage. But I always try to keep Sophie in the loop so she knows what's happening out there in the community.
So with that in mind, then an email like that, you wouldn't want to CC like multiple counselors, or you can you have a only Sophie CC'd?
No, so
I don't
I
CC
think
everyone. Yeah.
I think if somebody approached you as you're walking down Stillwater Trail and asked you for information, and you gathered that information and you thought, you know what, lots of people are probably going to ask this very same question to council, you could CC the entire council on your response to this person. What you shouldn't do is engage in discussion, email discussion with counselors, the whole council. So there will be times that I will send out a heads up. We're going to be talking about X, Y, and Z at the meeting, or this issue has come up and I want to give you a heads up about it. If you respond directly to me, we can go back and forth. If you're talking to the entire council, then the argument is that that's a meeting that hasn't been properly noticed.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions that we can address now? I'm going to go back then to the appendix on ground rules. And as you probably noticed in the background to the agenda material, several counselors, past and present, have suggested that we develop something in the line of ground rules for the operation of our meetings. And this is just a starter. I think it's really clear that ground rules have to be something that everybody feels comfortable with, not just somebody who put this in a document. So I just ask people to take a look through it. If you see things that you're not comfortable with or things that you feel are missing, if you could get some information to either Sophie or myself, we would like to do some finish work on this and get it back to council at a workshop or regular meeting in the very near future. If anybody has feedback on it now, I'm happy to take it, but it's not something that has to get resolved today. This is just a starting point. And Laura, I see your hand up.
Can you share when and how you intend to use this?
I would say, I think, again, that's going to be a council decision. But for me, it would be rules that we would use in our public meetings. Any other questions or comments?
Just a comment. I was surprised that the cover of the book has my own name on it. So does that mean that it's possible that they're not all the same book and they're different books for each person, or is it only a different cover for each person?
It's a different cover for each person, I'm sure, because mine has my name on it too.
I found it very personalized, but also I thought that's one of the value of books is that you know that everyone gets the same thing. So by adding my name to the front, it made it clear this one was just for me. So
it is just for you, but everybody got the same material.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Sophie, I think you're gonna help us with meeting schedule.
So, I think there are kind of two parts to this. One is to talk about, in general, the council has been meeting, each committee meeting once a month, a workshop once a month, usually unless it's a month with 5 Mondays in it. That workshop has been being tagged on to the end of a regular council workshop. So you have your regular council meeting, 3 committee meetings, and a workshop either on its own or in conjunction with the regular council meeting. I have gotten into the habit of trying to post these a quarter at a time so that the public can see ahead where we're meeting, when we're meeting, and we begin to fill out the agendas that actually get posted well in advance on the website as we get closer to the meetings. So what you have right in front of you is what I've proposed for the second quarter. So that's April 1st to June 30, 2021. I did hear some commentary before the meeting about we don't have to meet again until April, and no such luck.
No.
I can review those meetings if we need. This meeting list is quite long because I've also included all of the budget workshops. As you look at the meeting schedule, from April 12th to May 10th, you see a start time of 5 p.m. and then in parentheses, another time between 7:16 and 7:51. Those other times are sunset. We try very hard not to go beyond sunset during Ramadan, which is the 12th of April through the 11th of May. So just to kind of make you aware if you're not used to that. I am aware of one potential conflict with Finance and Operations Committee. And I think we're going to try to work through that. Just moving the meeting to a 6:15 start instead of a 5 p.m. start when there's a conflict, I think is what we've arrived at.
Yes.
For a solution there. But otherwise, I guess my question is, does 5 o'clock work for people? Do Monday, Thursday meetings work for people? It's most important that council can participate and fully engage in the process, and I would hate a meeting day or time to make that not possible.
I
Laura?
thank you so much for trying to standardize days and times. Monday at 5 has been working for me for years. It's great. Well, 7 before, and since COVID times 5. Love it earlier. Thank you so much. In the past, Thursday has worked for me, and we used to meet, the finance committee met more during the day. I prefer, if possible, that we have them be Mondays and Wednesdays, because I made a commitment to do something for my own personal health on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and now I can't, and Thursday inhibits me from doing that. So I'm hoping that we could do it Monday, Wednesday.
So the reason we didn't do Wednesday is because we have to work around some other town boards that meet Wednesday nights, and especially during COVID, when we're on Zoom, that is, I can only host one meeting at a time. I mean, council is the king of the castle or the queen of the castle. So if you tell me when you're going to meet, we move other people. But just to let you know, the reason we stayed away from Wednesdays is because that is the night that everybody else tries to kind of fill in.
Mondays and Thursdays works for me, Sophie. These times all work, so.
Yeah. Laurie, is that a commitment every Thursday that you'll have?
I had this idea I was going to sign up for health things, and I signed up for a karate on Tuesday and Thursday, and it's 6 to 7, and so I can come at 5, and then as I've done in the past a couple of times, sometimes I've just blown it off, which my sensei is not pleased about, and just stayed at meetings on Thursday nights. But when I've disappeared at some minutes to 6 and been on my phone, it's because I'm driving to the dojo. So I can still do that.
That might make us try to be very, very efficient and do the most important items earliest in the meeting, and make sure that we do them while you're there. Can we at least try that and see how that works?
Would 4:30 work for other people on Thursday?
Good for me. Everybody, would it work for other people?
I'd have to make adjustments. I'm already making adjustments now, so I have a very, very tight schedule, very professional schedule. Also, I'm making concessions up here in the county. Mondays are typically hard for me. I really don't appreciate imposing on the people that I have, but I make it work, and they're very kind. Thursdays are just it's my committee, and I feel like it's a space that works for me to run it effectively.
Okay. Well, let's stick to 5 for the time being. Let's see if we can focus items that might be most important or most controversial early in the meeting. And let's try that for a while and see how that works. If that is a real problem, then we'll try to look at another solution.
Thank you.
And we are going to move one finance committee meeting. Do you have the date on that? Just so people can correct their form.
So actually, we've got 2. The finance committee meeting that's scheduled for March 22nd is going to move from 5 o'clock to 6:15 start. And I had community development committee in on April 22nd. That really would be April 15th is really the 3rd Thursday. I missed the 1st. I apologize for that.
Okay, I got that correction.
Could you repeat that? The first one you said was finance committee on the 22nd is moving to 6:15, and what was the second one?
No, finance committee, March 22nd, the finance committee meeting is going to move to 6:15. Community development committee that was scheduled on your paper for for April 22nd is moving to April 15th. And there is no magic with that. If the 22nd is better for people, we can leave it. It's just off rotation.
Which of those is during the school vacation? And does that make any difference to people? That April meeting, either the 15th or the 22nd must be during the public school vacation.
I think the 22nd is, yeah, but
Okay.
it doesn't make a difference to me.
Well, it's probably even easier for some folks if we don't do it during that vacation week. So that's probably a good move.
So that's at 5.
Yes.
Yes,
It looked like Jeff had something to say. He unmuted. and
I'm
then-
sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that our travel opportunities are limited this year anyway. So
Yeah.
this is the year to move it. Right. So sorry.
No problem. Okay, so I think we're all set with meeting schedule. And we did talk about committee meetings, and Sophie is going to be sending out a little survey to people shortly. Or maybe Bella's sending it out on committee assignments. So existing counselors will have an opportunity to say, I'm fine staying where I am, or I'd like to make a move. And new counselors can indicate what committees they'd like to serve on. All counselors are welcome to participate in all committee meetings. So if you don't happen to be on the finance committee and you have some interest in what is on the discussion for that meeting, you are more than welcome to attend that meeting or all meetings. And in April, we will be finalizing assignments and we'll be finalizing subcommittee chairs.
I think the goal too is when, with the survey, we're going to ask for your first, second, and third choice. There are 3 committees, so. And I think the goal is to make sure everybody gets at least one first choice and fill in from there. Luckily, that becomes the council chair's prerogative at that point to create the slate, but we'll get the information to them.
And speaking of that, in our regular April meeting, we will elect a council chair for the coming year. So we can be thinking about that. Annual and upcoming important training opportunities. I think we're going to go right back to you, Sophie.
Thank you. So in this meeting, in the past, we've had a couple of hours and we've spent doing step-by-step Freedom of Access Act training and step-by-step stormwater training. And everybody's eyes kind of glaze over at the thought of that training. So this year, Belle and I got together and we'd like to try something a little bit different. I'm going to start with FOA, our affectionate name for Freedom of Access Act, and give you very, very high level. And then I'm going to send you the frequently asked questions and answers that are posted on the state website, along with a document that I'm going to ask you to sign and get back to me, where you certify that you've read it. When I look at the people sitting around this Zoom, the panel, I see folks who are pretty engaged in having been on public committees before. So my thought was we would do this, and if you had complex questions, I have already worked a little bit with Tom to try to make an arrangement for the town attorney to come in and do an elected officials workshop with you. The complex FOA questions would be great to try to stump Roger with. That's just fun to try to stump the town attorney. But so if I will start with FOA. Belle's going to start very high level with stormwater, and she is creating a video with a quiz that goes at the end. And as long as you pass the quiz, we will be all set to put it in the file and prove to the EPA that we have met the requirement. So my hope is that this is going to take all of maybe 10 minutes as opposed to 2 hours, but understand that comes with homework that I will need you to do on your own time and get back to me. So Freedom of Access Act, we've talked about it a little bit already. It is also known as the Maine Open Meetings Law. The right to know would be another name that it goes by. But essentially, it's the idea that as government, the work that we do is supposed to be public. So the decisions that we make should be public, and information, that documents that we have are also public. So we have worked really hard to put a good email system in place. So when you use the town email, that is automatically being archived for you. So you don't have to worry about doing anything with that. And Belle and her team manages our archived material. If you get an email on your personal account and you are going to respond, make sure you send it to your work account so that they have the initial email that came in and your response to it all archived. Be aware, the lesson that you can learn, that whatever you write should be able to be posted on the bulletin board as you drive into town, or the welcome sign as you come into town. Keep that in mind. I have been in situations where I've had to disclose documents that I had preferred people had maybe spent a little bit more time thinking about what would happen if it got into, the front page of the Bangor Daily News. So just remember that you have absolutely no right to privacy on the town email. It can be searched. It often, when we have forward requests, we do search council as well as staff. So just kind of be aware of that. Also, be aware that if you have a document relating to town business in your possession, you are public officials holding a document that it relates to town business, that is now a public document. If it is an original, meaning not a copy of something I've given to you, there are archival rules with that document, which is why we have worked really hard to try to get it to a point where council doesn't have much original material, so that I can be responsible for archiving and making sure that the material is stored in the appropriate way and disposed of when it's supposed to be disposed of. If you are representing the town on a committee or as a liaison outside and you have documents related to that, you want to just be aware you can't just throw them away. So we would want to talk about what those documents are when you think you're ready to throw them away, and decide whether or not they need to have a home at town hall, or you'd like to keep them safe somewhere, or if they can just be disposed of. Am I making sense? Yes? Okay. We talked about meeting. If you have like notes in passing, that's fine. The super informal notes in passing. If you're in an executive session, everybody knows what an executive session is, right? Yes. Jeff? Yes. Okay. Please do not take notes, because those can be forward and we would have to potentially give them up. And if you're in an executive session, it means you're talking about something that is not public by very virtue of the executive session. So that is my high level. The last thing I will tell you is, in Orono, I am the public information officer. So all forward requests are supposed to travel through me or get copied to me. So if you have questions, technically, I guess I'm supposed to be the expert for Orono. So please feel free to ask me. I'm not saying I am an expert.
Laura, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Can you, maybe you already shared it, but for just general council materials that we're going to get on a monthly basis, weekly basis, did you say there was special handling of those, or those are just copies? So
Those are all copies.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
And every once in a while, if I had like a pretty major personnel issue happening or something that was confidential, that I wouldn't want to send via email, I might send you a memo in a sealed envelope. Those, the expectation is that you would dispose of those. I will keep the original in case we're ever asked for it. Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. So I will send out the frequently asked questions, and the newly elected officials must provide me with a certificate, self-certifying that they've looked at them and understand them within 120 days of your election, or else we're breaking the law. We wouldn't want to do that.
No.
So if there are no more questions about FOA, I would turn it over to Belle to talk just for a minute about stormwater.
There you are.
Hopefully I'm giving you a better microphone audible experience now. So I will be very brief. Way back in the late 70s, we're not going to go decade by decade here, the Clean Water Act was enacted, and they created permitting for what's called storm sewer systems. And the town of Orono, because we are a urban area, by virtue of our density, there's a section of Orono that is considered part of the greater Bangor urbanized area, has an EPA permit for our municipal separate storm sewer system, which we will call MS4 from here on out. So if you ever hear MS4, we are talking about the storm sewers, not the sanitary sewers. The Maine Department of Environmental Protection is our regulatory body for this license, because the DEP has delegated their authority to Maine DEP. The important things to know before you kind of go through the whole the training is that our sanitary sewer and our storm sewers are separate. They don't intermingle, and the storm sewer funnel water directly from our streets to our water bodies. So there is no treatment for stormwater, and that is critical when we talk about doing maintenance and wanting to make sure that we have all our culverts, all our ditches, all of our sewer systems are in good working order, so we are not sending debris to the water bodies. So primarily the Stillwater River, the Penobscot River, and Johnny Mac Brook are the three identified in the town of Orono. And you will get a far more detailed PowerPoint to review with some lovely narration. And then at the end of that will be a link to a SurveyMonkey quiz. And that is the quiz that you must pass. I will give you a hint that you can click on that link as you go through the PowerPoint, so that you can make sure that you are learning the correct information, all that we wish for you to know. Any questions that we need to address tonight? Jeff Wingard is an old hat at this. He comes to our street and stream cleanups every year.
So the only thing I would add to what Belle has said is that it's really great to know information, and learning is a wonderful thing. When it comes to our stormwater permit, if we fail to show that we have trained counsel, if we fail to follow the MS4 requirements, there are significant financial penalties associated with that. So I want you to learn, but I also want to make sure we do it.
Sophie, I'd just add to the training opportunities that as members of the council, we are all eligible for the information that is put out by the Maine Municipal Association. They put out a great deal of good quality information and sponsor a variety of different training opportunities. So you just keep your eyes open. You'll get You'll get a monthly magazine from them. You'll get newsletters from them. You'll get legislative updates from them. And they do a really good job of getting information out to council members and selectmen. Yes, Laura.
Yeah, I got a login for the MMA, but then when I tried to sign up for a training, it said I wasn't a member. Are we supposed to be paying the member rate, or are they free, even the paid ones?
No, it means that we need to follow up because two arms are not talking with each other. So of MMA. So
To register for trainings is a completely separate login. And Nancy has that. She's the only, I don't have it. Nancy has it. And she would happily register you. And she also gets the bill processed and paid as well. I went down that rabbit hole just last week. So that's how I know this particular two arms not talking.
So just to be clear on your question, Laura, the trainings are not free, but the town does pay for them.
I see. Okay.
The one training that's coming up from MMA that is a newly elected municipal officials training in May, instead of waiting until May and to ensure that everybody gets a little bit of a refresher, we are working with the town attorney, Roger Huber, to actually provide that training. I'm hoping we were hoping we could do it on April 1st, which is a Thursday. And I don't know if that will work, if we need to try to look for a different day to do that. The Mondays are all kind of taken at this point. In general, I think it's important that the entire council do it together. So if Councillor Osher has a conflict, then maybe we could look for a Wednesday that I don't have a other town meeting going on. Would a Wednesday work for other people?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Or the 8th. The 1st is not ideal. Under duress, I can make it, but it's less ideal. So a different Thursday or a Wednesday is fine for me, either one.
I know Terry's got a really tight schedule. What would that look like for you, Terry?
What was the date again? I'm sorry.
I would look at a Wednesday. In April, I think it would have to be, I could do the 7th after 6:30. It would have to be a 6:30 start. So it would be 6:30 to 7:30. Because we've got tree board from 5 to 6:15.
I have a broadband caucus from 6 to 7, but this takes priority. So I could do it at 6:30, but 7 would be better. And the broadband caucus is a legislative group, bipartisan senators and House talking about how we're going to try to get the state to do broadband. So would 7 on Wednesday, the 7th, work for people?
Work for me.
I think Terry's looking at his calendar. Right.
I'll figure out a way to make it work.
Thank you, Terry.
The only moving part now is going to be to get back in touch with Roger and make sure he'll be fine. I'm assuming he will be, but I will confirm that with you.
Great. Okay. And I think we're ready to move on to the next item, which is council pre-budget feedback survey. And again, that's something that Sophie's going to talk about.
So this year's budget is a little different than other years. First and foremost, I've never had so many new faces coming in right as the budget is getting ready to drop. And so I'm looking for a little bit of feedback. The second is there were some places in the budget that we had some known expansion that the budget is going to reflect. My recommendation on the budget is going to reflect. But there are some other options that kind of go with that. And I'd like to get some feedback ahead of time to see how counselors feel about those. In order to make this make sense, it ends up being about a paragraph and then a couple of questions. So take a department, about a paragraph, and then 2 or 3 questions to try to give you options to kind of see where you are. The other piece of this, so I work with my staff. My staff does the bulk of the heavy lifting on the budget, but I get all of their requests in and I create a budget that becomes my best estimate of how much it is going to cost and how much revenue we would bring in based upon my understanding of council's desired level of service. So as an example, this year, council has already determined a level of service in the fire department. We're adding a shift by contract. Where in the last year of the labor agreement, and as part of that labor agreement, we agreed to add a 4th shift. So that is pretty cut and dried as to cost. With regard to rec, we had agreed to begin some expansion of rec last year. I've got an idea, given the level of resources that were allocated last year, what I can do in non-pandemic circumstances with that. But I've got some other options that I'd like to put in front of you that would be further expansion of that. We have some capital investment ideas that I'd like to kind of put out there. So when you get the budget, it looks pretty cut and dry to a casual observer, but it really isn't. Once council gets the budget, it's really council's opportunity to dig into what is the service level that they want. Do they want us to be quicker plowing the roads? Do they not care if it takes us 24 hours to take care of a sidewalk? It's an opportunity for us to really talk about the service level. And so we put a lot of information together and it looks pretty absolute, but in fact, the budget document is just a starting point. The whole goal of it is to support council discussion. One of the things I've noticed is we get everything pulled together with potential tax rate implications, and it looks all nice and tight. And then we get to council and we really dig into the line items sometimes, very much so into the line items. And then we turn around at the last minute at the last workshop and talk about projects that council wants that are sometimes really big sweeping projects that really can't fit in. So part of my goal with this survey is to also survey counselors about, are there specific projects that are not currently on the table that you want me to make sure I put in the budget, even if it's just as talking points to make sure we don't lose them. So for example, if we're going to be talking about the potential of putting electric car chargers in parking lots, we should have that conversation when we have Rob Yerxa there to be able to talk to us about the pros and the cons and our infrastructure as it exists and how much money that might cost. And if we know ahead of time what you're looking at, it makes it much easier for us to tell you what kind of resource we would need to make that happen. So kind of instead of everything flowing in at the very last minute when counselors have sharpened their pencils, my thought is if I could get at least some of that information at the front end and include it in the budget, even if it ends up just being a counselor has suggested X, is the other reason for that survey. My goal with this budget is to provide you with all of the information that you need to have a good discussion of the service level and the cost of providing those services. Making some sense? So my fear is that, like with most things lately, it is taking me longer to put this together than I had hoped. I hope to get it out to council by late Wednesday or early Thursday. And I'm hoping counselors can turn that around to me by the beginning of next week. I don't need books. We're gonna try to make this as click friendly as possible, but if that, I'm hoping that's a reasonable timeline.
Yep.
Sophie,
Sounds good.
can I ask a question? And this may be totally preemptive and maybe not discussion worthy at the moment. But with the COVID relief bill, is that going to be a significant impact on us? I mean, will we have more? I mean, I know you don't know right now, but I'm wondering with the survey, if we are thinking of projects, will there be extra funds to maybe just put a wish list together or something?
So in my
Packets are coming.
manager, in my manager's report, I wanted to talk a little bit about that, the impact of the stimulus package, because there is one. And I've talked with Council Chair Perry a little bit. I've given him a proposal for how we kind of attack that. Can we hold that just till I get to my manager's report? Would that be all right?
No, thank you, Sophie.
Okay. Anything else on the survey? We'll look for it this week, and we will get it back to you just as soon as we can. And Laura,
Does any of the budget planning align with kind of that overall goals document that you have, or with implementation of the comp plan? So is that going to be kind of visible when we start to see budget stuff, that it ties in this way, so we know kind of it was prioritized in this and that's why it's here, or not?
So in the past, I haven't done that just because everybody who had created the document was sitting at the table, but that makes a lot of sense. Let me see how I can take our current documents and modify them just a little bit so that we can see how that works. I don't know that we would do it on a line item basis, but I think we could absolutely do it on a bigger basis.
And if it's
Departmental.
a huge lift for this year, don't do it. But I think it would be interesting to understand, if we have these several big goals, how and where is the money flowing to support those?
Yep,
Makes
I think
sense.
that makes a lot of sense. I think that's great.
Good suggestion.
And I think sometimes too that our department heads, when they come in, they often attach a goal that has been, it's either in the comprehensive plan, and so there's a lot of information that they give us too about where their departments are headed and why they're headed in that direction. So I think we do get some of that information. So when we do these budgets.
We all set there? Are we ready to move on to town manager's report?
So when I wrote it, I didn't have a lot to talk about, but after the weekend, I have a bit to talk about. Let's start with Cheryl's question about the stimulus package. So I have not seen anything official yet, but I've seen lots of unofficial things. Unofficially, the town of Orono is slated to receive approximately $1 million over the next 2 fiscal years. So approximately $500,000 in the next 60 days and another $500,000 60 days after that. My understanding is that it cannot be used to reduce taxes. This is not intended to be a tax reduction tool. So we have been encouraged to think about one-time uses, whether it be to take some of it and put it into reserves because we elected not to fund any of the reserves last year. Or if we had drawn down a lot of fund balance, I think we could have put it back in to bolster fund balance. Infrastructure is a place that I think we would definitely want to look at for investment. So when I talked with Tom about the path forward, I think that this money is a little bit different than other money that we may receive. It's highly political. People have very strong opinions on whether we should have it. And it seems to me that it would require its own degree of transparency with how that money is decided to be spent and how it ultimately is spent. So my suggestion was that I worked with staff to create just kind of a laundry list of options of kind of priorities from the staff perspective. And we bring that to the town council. You could look at it, disregard things, add things, totally disregard the whole document if you want, but come up with a plan for how it will get spent or saved. And once we have that plan, we make it look pretty, and we put it on the website for the world to see how we are, what we're doing with those tax dollars. When I talked to Rob Yerxa about how we might spend another $1 million, he said, "Gee, boss, I could get that spent for you in 5 minutes." And so I think we're going to be in a situation where there will be lots of ideas and an opportunity for council to kind of really think long-term about what the best solution will be for Orono.
And hopefully in the near future, Sophie, we're going to see some additional information from the feds as to more specifically how it can be used and how it can't be used. I listened to Senator King on a Maine Municipal Association webinar last week, and he was not clear about all the uses and non-uses, other than he did say again that couldn't be used for tax reduction. Now that's kind of a misnomer in a way, because if we were to fund a capital project out of it, I mean, that's eventually saving the taxpayers money. But I understand what he was saying. You can't just say, well, we're going to reduce our mill rate next year because we have this $1 million or whatever it is.
And I think the other piece that is a detail but will be very important to us is whether or not that money, if it sits for a period of time, will lose its restrictions around spending federal money or not. So for example, if we put it in the infrastructure reserve, does that mean it could sit for 3 years and we could use it on local terms as opposed to federal terms? And project costs go up significantly when we look at federal projects. Oftentimes it's worth it because you're using free money. Well, it's not free, but freer. So I think those details are going to be really important, and I'd like to wait until we have the details to be able to come and have a fact-based discussion with council.
So we are not to consider these funds as a part of our town budgeting process. Is that what I'm hearing? Like it's going to be separate. So don't think, oh, that's going to come from this, or like, because you're describing what sounded to me like a similar timeline for the two, but it's going to be separate. Is that correct?
So ultimately, Laura, you're going to hear this from me a lot. I work for you. So you guys get to decide what the timeline is going to be. My suggestion is to keep it more separate. And part of my fear is if we look at it just as commingled revenue, that you could make decisions that are long-term costs that we incur every year, and then we create another kind of cliff. And I would prefer not to do that. But you tell me when you want to work this through, and if you have a different idea, I am all ears.
Can I just ask one question? What's the guiding principles that staff are going to use to identify what they think are priorities? Like, are they going to be working off the town goals document or the comp plan, or just kind of what's on fire in front of them? Do you have guidelines for them on that?
So my guidelines are to look at projects that are not specifically on a plan right now, but that are necessary. So for example, council should expect to see the renovation of Keith Anderson on the plan. as an option from staff. We are looking at another option to try to expand indoor recreation space. You might see that on there. So things that are not currently part of the known capital plan is kind of where we were headed from. The other place that we were looking at, we could spend it all on Main Street if council wanted to expand the scope of the Main Street pedestrian sidewalk project, as an example. So that is an expanded scope of work that we have really narrowed down because of money. So those are the kinds of things that, from a staff perspective, where we are looking at more of the infrastructure needs that currently don't have a home on our plan. Infrastructure / capital needs.
Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm sure the department heads have a wish list, and I know that I have a wish list, and people who I talk to have a wish list. I'm wondering if council also has its own sort of formal or informal sort of set of priorities that they would like to address at some time. Is that contained in a document anywhere, or has been that part of minutes in any meeting?
Or can we add it to that survey that you're sending out for budget priorities?
But Sophie, isn't that our work plan that we put together?
So that's an annual, yeah, that work plan is an annual plan. I think we look at, there are a couple of things on the council, that council has put on the longer term capital plan. But I get where both Jeff and Laura are coming from. Instead of kind of looking right here in front of us, longer term, is there a way that we might be able to utilize that money for something that is important, but we might not otherwise have considered because we just haven't thought of it kind of right in front of us. So how about, Laura, I would hate to put you on the spot, but I'm gonna ask if you might help me frame a question for the survey that gets at what you're looking for. Does that work? And Jeff, do you think we're on the right track with that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm looking for more information, so I think that's super. Thanks.
And I think the purpose in staff making a list is more to just throw ideas to council for you to consider and for us to talk about a little bit, but it also will give you some insight into some problems that or needs that we see ahead of us that aren't on the plan yet. Oh, you need to.
I want it to be worthwhile to share the 5-year capital plan with our new council members. It might be that the part of this discussion is we're going to move something up that we had to postpone for several years, especially with an infrastructure project. So that might be something that would be helpful for them to see.
Yeah. I will get that to folks.
Sophie, when do you need that question? You're trying to get the survey out Wednesday?
Yeah, if I had it.
Okay, that's fine. Yep.
Okay, that would be great. That would be great. So that's the money piece. I like money. Money's good. So this weekend, I think most everybody saw I sent an email out saying that Friday was a beautiful day, and with beautiful day comes unruly behavior. So today I spent time on the phone with the town attorney and also with the Avenue. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page. On Friday afternoon, crowds began to gather at the Avenue. The police department got a call at approximately 4:30, 5 o'clock, saying that a crowd had gathered outside on private property, on the Avenue's property, drinking and gathered. By the time the police department got there, There were in excess of 30 to 40 people. And our sergeant, who our most tenured sergeant on Friday night, which was good. But he contacted leadership and they made the decision that it was best practice at that point to monitor the situation, that there was no violence happening. There was, people were gathered. They did not have masks on, but what we are hearing more and more is having police arrive at a situation like that that is not violent and step in to break it up is often what sparks really bad situations. So we elected to stand back and monitor the situation. So this morning, we spent time, my public health team, Chief Lowe and Chief Ewing, who are both in the background here today and will raise their hand if they wish to participate. Both of them and I spent some time this morning talking about our frustration with the continued gatherings at these large-scale housing complexes. And quite honestly, we have 3 of those complexes and problems with one of them right now. Later in the day, I fielded a call from the Avenue expressing their irritation that our police department only monitored the situation. So after conversation with the town attorney, conversation with my staff again, we actually met along with representatives from the leadership of student life on campus with leadership of the Avenue and had a pretty frank conversation about my interpretation that they are not complying with the terms under which they were granted approval to build and manage, occupy their property. So specifically, the terms say that they are supposed to undertake certain efforts to mitigate the burden on the police department and ensure health and safety of people at the Avenue. And part of that is to have a third-party security force. There's another section that says that third-party security force shall have an overt and active presence from 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights when the university is in session. The issue that I have is they're looking at only having to do Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. They are not looking at the stipulation in number 2 that says they shall have a private security force on site. Had they had somebody on site, had they been managing the inflow of people and breaking people up as they began to congregate, we probably wouldn't have had the gathering that we had on Friday. So we have agreed to meet with Avenue people once again on Thursday. I think it will be Thursday at 2 to have further conversation about the town's expectations. The town's expectation, first and foremost, is that we are not security. We are not private security for any one taxpayer. And at a time when we are working really hard to build nice relationships with the community, Josh is making an incredible effort to not invite aggression, not invite conflict if we don't have to. And so we're really pushing back against the Avenue and their expectation that we would come up and police their gatherings. The issue that we have is warm weather is going to continue. There is no question about that. Spring is coming. And there are not the places that people might historically be able to go to blow off some steam. You know, lots of places are closed or are limiting the number of people that can be inside them. So I would expect to see these larger scale gatherings continuing to happen. So one of the things I wanted to just find out if there is any appetite on council's behalf to look at another emergency ordinance that would essentially temporarily adopt a mass gathering ordinance that would require gatherings of over a certain number of people, however we want to define that, to be permitted. And part of the permitting process would include a plan and resources being dedicated to making sure that we are making sure that their gathering is safe. So what are they doing to ensure that social distancing is in place? What are they doing to ensure that people are going to wear masks? What are they doing to ensure that they have appropriate security on site? All of the things that most, like when we work with the university or we work with, I think the other place we would work with would be like Tracy with some of her bigger events. They all have those plans in the background. And so when everybody gathers, we're aware of it. We know it's going to happen and people are making effort. I think that is it's a policy decision by council if you want to go through an emergency ordinance to enact something like that right now, or if you think we should just try to kind of work this through with the avenue. I will tell you, they have been, local management, I think, tries to be very receptive, but there is definitely a disconnect in what our expectations are for managing on site and our people, what they expect they need to do. They expect they pay taxes and we should provide security. And I think we have a police chief who is just on phone. We lost him and he's back, and it sounds like he wanted to add to the conversation.
So Josh, you should be able to talk now.
So I'm embarrassed, but I live farther enough out in Hamden that if the internet goes, I'm very lucky to be able to use my phone. So I missed, other than the last maybe 30 seconds of what Sophie said, I have missed all of this.
Okay, so
What do you
why don't
need-
we wait,
what
and
would-
see if council has questions, and maybe the questions will be things you can answer.
Perfect.
Sophie, my concern about an emergency ordinance, as you were describing it, is the Avenue is not the organizer of these events. I mean, these are more or less, the events that we're concerned about are more or less spontaneous events, or events that are put on social media in some way by students, and they gather. So I'm not sure how an emergency ordinance would address that kind of an event. If the Avenue was planning them, or the other large housing projects were actually the planning organization, it would make perfect sense to me. But I guess I'm at a loss as to how that would help us with the kind of situation that we face this weekend.
So my argument, and I'm not saying it's right, but I got the town attorney to kind of agree to it. My argument is that in creating a place and not adequately providing disincentive to an event like that occurring, that they are de facto hosting the event. So if they had on-site security around the clock, or at least on nice days, or however they wanted to do it, if they put fencing up, if they had a gate, a process to get through the gate, those are all things that they could do that would limit the risk. And when we look at, especially like the reserve, if people would recall, there was a time when they were really out of control, and they really, they put on extensive security. They had an incredible presence. And now you look, and while everything was out of control at the Avenue, it was pretty much, as Josh framed it, a retirement community, nice and quiet, and nothing major happening at the reserve or Orchard Trails. So I think what we're kind of grasping at is how can we make it more cost effective for them to do prevention as opposed to getting hit for fees for service, which quite honestly are a drop in the bucket. And I don't know what Josh might want to add to that.
I think that the response from the AV is we are the place to go. When the reserve opened up as the Grove, they became the place to go, and that's why the students all went there. And it was more about the design that drew the students there. But once the Grove cracked down and had the gate monitored and working, and regular security that was holding people accountable to the tiniest of infractions, the problem went away. You can't say that the AV is the new thing now, because the AV's been around for years. It is just that I don't think that they've stepped up, other than having a little bit of security, inconsistent now that it is, as it is, but other than having that added security on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, again, inconsistently, that's all they've done. There's been no additional, and they will say that they are holding, individual apartments accountable when we go to a noise complaint, but I don't think that that's the same as having a greater presence of security operating in a much more stringent and strict manner, and a gate and a fence and all the other things that Sophie mentioned.
I wonder if all the kids that were at Orchard Trails and the other one just went to the Ave, and that's why it was so quiet. They only have 8 weeks left. So what are we looking at in 8 weeks? Can they?
What can they do?
Yeah.
Well, we also tend to hear from them that they, security, the one company that they've used and that did the job really well at the reserve is no longer providing services in this area, and that they've struggled statewide to find a security company that can man and staff the personnel necessary to do the job. I don't think that's an excuse that I'm not willing to accept that excuse. You could pay someone enough to make it worth their while to come here and do the job. A temporary fencing could be put up in a day. A gate could be put up over a course of a week. I think that there's a lot that we could expect over the next 8 weeks, because the alternative is it's just going to get warmer and nicer, and we're just going to deal with this for the next 8 weeks.
Sophie, when we put the original mask mandate in place, weren't there fines? Are we levying fines against the Ave right now?
So what I have asked the town attorney to do is, because the Ave, with regard to their COVID plan, has been working through an attorney. We needed to go the legal route to get that accomplished. I asked our attorney to look at the ordinance, because we have to be very careful where there are on private property. The mask mandate on its own, the ordinance doesn't apply to them. It would be pulled in through the planning, the COVID planning element of the second piece of that. So so I've asked Matt to take a look at that and to tell me how we can begin to approach fines with them for non-compliance of their plan. So this is a situation where we've gone back and forth with mass gatherings, we've gone back and forth with disorderly properties, and we can never quite find the sweet spot to hit, because we don't want to unduly punish smaller entities that quite honestly aren't causing problems like this. And we want to be fair. We don't want to be unduly harsh. But by the same token, until it costs as much to not do it correctly as it does to do it correctly, people are going to make financial decisions potentially. And you know, the fine for the mask would be $1,000, and you know that is not a ton of money.
Is your bigger concern the masks or is it the gatherings period?
So before COVID came about, Josh and I had reached out to the town attorney because we had already, Josh had made some connections at the National Police Academy with some folks that deal with riot situations in New York City. So they had a lot of expertise. We had already reached out to them and determined that attacking a crowd was not a good practice. And so our plan as we approached Main Day was to treat it more like a public safety incident, meaning we'd have incident command, we'd sit back. If there was something happening that absolutely needed to be intervened, we would very surgically go in, deal with it, pull that piece out, and not work at trying to break up the crowd is the guidance that we had been given. But for COVID, that is exactly what, you know, that would be our plan. With COVID, at a time when our numbers are spiking again in Penobscot County, Josh and Jeff and I are really concerned that as we continue to come together with these large gatherings with no social distancing and no masks, that we are really creating a public health concern.
Reaction, comments from other committee members?
Sophie, I think that this is something that, you know, if you speak of the other two locations, that it's probably more driven about how do I get bodies into my facility. And if you've got a perception that this is the place to be, they're probably going to balk against it. Now, if you were looking at something with like a fine or whatever, a mask fine, could it be something that you look at and say it's a mask fine per head? So if you had 30 people there, there's X amount of dollars for every single person that has to be, I mean, that if you want to start talking about numbers, and yes, I agree, they're not going to want to play, even though it's the most responsible thing to do, which just so sophomoric of them to kind of act this way. But if you have to hit them where it hurts, then maybe it's a per head count. Just a thought.
I think, excuse me, can I speak? So I'm thinking that it's a big challenge, and I appreciate you bringing this to us. And I'm glad whoever, you know, told the town that this is going on. In Dartmouth University had similar problems, and they just had an outbreak and they shut down. You know, everyone's basically confined to their rooms on campus. And so I'm glad that you also communicated with the university, because if these are university students, then they're violating the code of conduct. I'm also pleased that you talked with the facility, the business themselves, about their responsibility to have public safety that they've hired as a third party. And yes, I'm with Josh that if they can't find people to do that, then they must have to wider net or pay more. If the service that provided it isn't providing anymore, that's their obligation to provide that. And I would prefer to use the tools that we already have rather than have another emergency ordinance, because I think that there are tools out there and that you're following the right thing, which is to communicate with them that you're expecting them, the other people in this community, in this issue, to step up and use the tools that they are contractually obligated to use.
Since I'm not on camera and I can't see Sophie on camera, so she can't wave me off at this point, I'm just going to chime in here. And I feel a little bad for Councilor Wingard and Councilor Mitchell because you haven't seen me get mad and you assume that I'm just this nice, politically good and diplomatic guy. These are the things that make me mad. And they probably saw it today when I was speaking to the AV. When you place both my officers and a whole bunch of kids at risk, because these kids are primed for, quite frankly, a confrontation with the police. They never got it out of their system last March, and we've seen it across the country already, just recently in Colorado. So we're being placed, these officers are being placed in a position where eventually we're going to having to break something up, or we're just going to have to wait until things get chaotic enough that we have to go in and start dealing with this. If the AV hasn't done enough to make sure that these events don't take place, then it's on them. And these are the things that absolutely make me mad, because I just see us having to hurt somebody or us getting hurt in an attempt to break something up or deal with something. So anything, and I have respect for all of you, and no matter what you decide, I'll still have the same amount of respect for you and admiration for all that you do for this town. But I'm asking you to please be willing to step in and do something to put a little more pressure on this group so that we don't end up on a national news article.
So do you want us to do an emergency ordinance, or what else? What is it that you want us to do?
This is where I love to say things like, when the budget, I'll ask you for what I need for the budget, but you tell me what you're going to put, how much money you're going to give me, and I'll figure it out. I don't really have this is where is outside my purview of, I don't know, if an emergency ordinance is what is necessary, great. Or if there's something we're missing as far as an opportunity that things are already on the book that we can enforce, please do it. I'm just encouraging you to do whatever you can to make a very public and clear message that the town is not accepting what has been done so far, and there needs to be more done.
Do we have the ability to fine them for not complying with having this person that's supposed to be there that's not the town police?
So I've talked with code enforcement. We are getting ready to issue a notice that will go out. Should probably give them 7 days to get somebody. And the fine is $100 a day. So it's $100 a day right now, or the cost of security.
And Sophie, getting the university involved in Bob Dana and all of the people that are involved in that, having the kids expelled from school, I mean, sending them home, you can't comply, go home. Is that a possibility?
So it is an absolute possibility. And in fact, they have interimly suspended several kids that were at that gathering. I think in talking with, so the university thinks that this is so important that today on our call, we had we had the associate dean and the assistant dean, and they were calling in, you know what I mean? They think it's important enough for, and what the conclusion that we came to when I met directly with the university after our meeting was this needs to be multi-pronged. The university can be a partner at the table. We want to work with the Avenue, they are a taxpayer and they are important to Orono. We want to work with them, but it feels like the things that we are expecting of other people that other groups are doing to keep kids safe, it's not that they're saying we don't want to do that. I think they really don't see it as their responsibility. And Jeff was one of our prime spokespeople today, so maybe he's got a different view.
So Councilor Wingard, Councilor Mitchell, my name's Jeff Lowe. I'm the fire chief from Orono. Well, obviously from Orono since I'm on this meeting, huh? So a couple things that I think is important. Number one, I agree with Josh that it increases risk to law enforcement officers, not only for needing to go hands-on with individuals, but just exposure to COVID, poor public relations, all of those things. Is an emergency ordinance what's needed? I don't know. And honestly, I don't think it would be appropriate for you all to say tonight at this meeting, this is what we have to do. I think that what we would really appreciate out of this is the go forward and see what this really means, because we recognize that it's a true issue, and bring it back to you. I'm going to go one step further here, and I'm going to say this is a get out of jail free card for the council, in that this is a failed policy that has not been picked up and run with, that has been a needed thing for quite some time. To think that a university community does not have a mass gathering ordinance with the potential for concerts or other things that bring large numbers of people in, that would just potentially decimate our public safety for 2, 3, 4 days, blows my mind. And I think back to the Monsters of Rock tour that came into Oxford back in the late 80s it was. And for 3, 4, 5 days, EMS and law enforcement were just running ragged, and there was nothing in place then. There was no way to stop them. There were no fines that could be established. So in my mind, this is a shot across the bow to say to you, we know this is a tough situation. We know that not everybody's going to be happy, but there has to be some parameters that are put in place by the legislative body so that we're able to have some type of control in the future. So I think in my mind, those are the two big things that we're driving for here. And I'm certainly willing to answer questions or whatever, if you have anything from me.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason that I'm asking if we would even consider the emergency mass gathering ordinance is that it would give us an opportunity to implement it with regard, especially with the current COVID public health emergency, to see how it works. It's not having to go through all of the vetting that a formal permanent ordinance would go through, but it would kind of give us a framework to work from in the future, I think. Having said that, just like Josh and Jeff have said, I get that that might not ultimately be where you want to go. I think what I'm looking for is the only way for us to really dig into an emergency ordinance to understand our powers is to spend some money. And if you have no interest in doing it, then we will stop and turn our attention elsewhere, because we've racked up enough legal fees this year dealing with COVID.
Now, thank you, Sophie, for answering my question. Sorry, Jeff, Chief Lowe, that I'm skipping back to something that I said before, which was, couldn't we just make a fine? And now I get why Sophie said, there's people don't just go ahead and do things when the fine isn't very big. So that is not very big, that $100 fine you mentioned. So is there a way for us to increase the fine such that it's painful? I know when I did watershed work, people would get fined for cutting trees near riparian zones, and the wealthier the person was, the less they cared. They just cut them down because the fine wasn't big enough for it to, if they wanted their view, they just cut it down. And so really but if the fines were higher, then people who just kind of made an error suddenly were out a large amount of money. So in this case, $100, they'll spend more than that to have someone there. So obviously it's cheaper for them just to pay the fine. Is there a way we can raise that?
So long term you could, but not just for one. It would have to get raised for everybody. But I think for me, in order to get something on the books soon, the only way to do that is through an emergency ordinance. If we look at the real concern here, which I think Josh can manage large gatherings. I think the issue for us right now is definitely the wrinkle that COVID creates in terms of a risk to the whole community. So when I chatted with the attorney earlier today, looking at that idea of mass gathering, it really focused on having lots of people in one place in an unsafe way, and making sure that planning had gone into effect to deal with it. And I would argue that nice days in Orono, Maine, towards the end of the semester are events, and everybody should be planning for them.
Sophie, I'd really like to hear from Jeff and Laura. We haven't given them an opportunity to kind of chime in on this.
I have a question. Thank you, Terry. I have, is the ultimate stick, if everything went awry, does the town have the authority to pull the occupancy permit for, I mean, ultimately, like after a legal process? That's what we've got in our back pocket, right?
Yeah, and I think I'd have to do a little bit more research, Jeff, but it has to be pretty heinous violations, long-term, plenty of opportunity to correct them, to get an occupancy permit pulled.
So should the part of any proposed ordinance be the documentation of whatever behaviors, right? Regardless of whether that behavior is fined at that particular instance, right? It seems reasonable. Another question I have is, is it possible to, and I don't know how to do this, is it possible to incentivize better behavior on the part of the Ave instead of punishing them for bad behavior? I don't know what we would have in our toolbox to say, listen, you do a great job, and this is what else the town can do for you. I mean, we think about, carrot and stick kind of thing.
Yep.
So what I'm hearing is that this is about COVID. And so within that framework, I am very comfortable trying to take some step to mitigate the problem. And I agree, it's just going to get worse because it's that time of year. And there's a lot of pent up everything. I like the idea of really disincentivizing this as an option for the students and for the avenue itself. So I remember at one point the university came out really strongly with a gathering, and it was publicized, and it seemed very clear this is not what's going to be acceptable. Maybe I've missed it, but I didn't see that around this, and I haven't seen a lot around this, at least townwide. And so that might be one approach, to do this in partnership with UMaine. And I like the idea of the fines. Bigger, more cumulative.
So I will say we normally start our messaging around better behavior in like the weeks leading up to Main Day. So usually it's a few more weeks. I think that it popped like this because people are so cooped up, and it was such a beautiful day in the midst of winter. The university is planning a pretty mass effort to put words out, much like the Main Day message, which I think is what you're referring to, Laura, as well. And the message about the students that at least are interimly suspended is definitely making the rounds. And we saw that when students first came back to campus in August, September. There were a couple of parties, and the university and the town worked together to get that message out. We're doing the same thing again. The university, through its EOC and its student life, Office of Student Life, will be really generating that message, and we'll try to pick it up and echo it through the community as well. So I think that's part of it. And yeah, I I think Josh is in a really tough spot right now.
Sophie, can I just actually add one more thing in there? I think that even as having this conversation, the bigger picture really is about how this is not just this time. It's been going on for so long. I mean, we just have to think back to a couple years ago. And I remember Josh telling us that there was like 18 of them with an insane amount of people partying. So we deal with the issue at hand right now, but we also have to have the bigger thing to deal with, and that's going forward. These are not going to be gone after this is done. I'm concerned. I couldn't picture myself being an individual within those confines, having to be the person to take care of the situation. And I think it's be really bad of us to not do everything that we can to make sure that our public people and officials are like taken care of. And I worry for Josh's people. I worry for Jeff's people also. And so yeah, I just think that this is not just this thing. I mean, we got to deal with something right now to make sure that we mitigate it, but we really have to make it our focal point going forward. How are we going to best handle this to make sure our people are safe? Because I don't want to put any of our people in danger.
I think we all agree that this is a very serious problem. It's something that we should all take very seriously. I have no problem with spending some town resources exploring an emergency large group gathering ordinance. I'm not convinced that it's going to solve the problem that was dealt with this past weekend or those future problems, but I don't have any problem exploring it and seeing what we can do with it. I'm also very, very sympathetic to Josh's comments about what needs to be done at the Avenue. Better security, fencing, gate, and I'm not sure how we pressure them to get those things done, but we need to pressure them, that's for sure. And maybe, as Jeff was saying, threatening that we'll explore the possibility of removing your occupancy permit if you can't meet our expectations.
I'm in agreement with Tom, but I do think we need to protect our force and also the students. I think they're 19, 20 years old. And, things can happen with them too, with a gathering. Josh, do you know how big that gathering was on Sunday?
It was estimates 200 to 300 people.
Okay. Yeah, that's out of control. I'm in support. Whatever we decide, I will support. I will support our force and whatever we need to do to get the message across that this is not acceptable and it just can't happen.
And Josh, I think it goes without saying that I think your folks made exactly the right decision to monitor it and not get involved in a physical confrontation with people. That was the right thing to do that night.
Yeah, thank you. We don't have the personnel, and this is not 20 years ago. 20 years ago, 3 or 4 of us would have broken up. It wouldn't have been pleasant, and people would have left because they were somewhat afraid of the police. We're not in a place like that anymore. We're just not.
So moving forward, what I'd like to do is take the next 2 days to work with my staff and the town attorney and come back to you with a better framework of options. And also to get some answers around Jeff's suggestion around occupancy permit, because that I do think if we have people that aren't going to keep folks safe, we should be kind of looking at that. So we'll bring the whole team together and start kind of going through that with the town attorney and come back on Thursday at the Community Development Committee meeting. Terry, would you be all right with us spending some time on this?
Definitely. It's community development.
Okay. I've got another topic, if I can.
Yep.
So the other topic is, do you know how when we go through creating ordinances, we sometimes say we've done all that we can, but then when we start working with the ordinance, we find our flaws. So we have gotten quite a bit of interest in marijuana establishments, citing a marijuana establishment. And if you recall, we started thinking about wanting to buffer the University of Maine at their request. We had started with a 500-foot setback with the university. Then we had a conversation about more of the condo style or places or buildings that are on big, huge parcels of land. And we were talking at that point about in the C1, we have the mall would be an example of a very large piece of land. And we're talking about the setback for another parcel, another establishment to be. And we tweaked the ordinance, and a tweak in this section of the ordinance negated the buffer for the university. So when Kyle got into a discussion with a potential developer about where he might put, where a retail establishment might be cited, questions were raised about the language. We went back to it and we were like, whoops, the buffer for the university went away. And when we look at the Route 2 corridor, right now, the only place you can really cite a retail establishment is near the entrance to the University of Maine or way up almost out of the C2, so kind of by Founder's Place, which is a built-out residential property. So we talked with the town attorney because my first question, the charter was not completely clear whether or not council had to take an action in order for the ordinance to become effective. Council does not. So 30 days from the 9th, the marijuana ordinance goes into effect. I am suggesting that you let the ordinance go into effect, but put a moratorium on applications in the C2, which the only place that's impacted by that is that stretch of Route 2, so that we can put language in. Staff right now is looking at kind of two options. One is to put a buffer in near the entrances to the University of Maine, the entrance to the University of Maine. The other would be to simply take the C2 out of the ordinance. So the place that if we were going to have a marijuana establishment, it would go in over on the Stillwater side in the C1. So two options depending on whether or not you want to leave it open for future development, because what's keeping it is a 1,000-foot buffer around the sharing place and a buffer around the Islamic Center as well. So what I'm looking for is whether or not there is any interest here. You could just not do anything and it goes into effect, and we would likely have a retail marijuana establishment somewhere near the entrance to the University of Maine. Or we can put a moratorium on and simply not accept applications for that geographic area.
What say you?
I'm for looking at a moratorium. I just think that that's yeah. I just think it's best to just to do that right now.
I agree, and reassess that zone would be my desired next step.
A moratorium on that one zone.
Yeah, I would not want to put council in the position of putting a ordinance out to referendum and then putting a moratorium on that whole ordinance. I think that would be a mistake. But the only thing that was allowed in the C2 was retail marijuana establishments, so stores. And so everything else can go into all of the zones that they're allowed to go into, and retail could go into C1.
So a 500-foot setback from the entrance, or a 500-foot buffer around the entrance?
Yeah, so we had originally talked about a 500-foot buffer around everything, in which case all of Route 2 goes. What we're suggesting is around the entrance
If a store, because there's really no buildings out there to move into, it would have to be something that they would construct, correct?
Not necessarily. There is, I think part of the interest was that was identified was in a house that was
Oh.
for sale that could be retrofitted. So
Oh, I was
um,
wondering if the establishment itself was set back 500 feet from the 500-foot buffer, if that would still be, considered legal or part of the ordinance, but it would have to be something that was set way back off Park Street.
Sophie, I'm definitely in favor of a moratorium on that particular section of Park Street. And it would be interesting, I think, at some point to see some mapping as to what a 500-foot buffer looks like and what total elimination of that section, that C2 zoning section would look like. My sense is there's going to be very little space left on Route 2 for an establishment if we impose the buffer on all of the items that we need to.
that, I think you're absolutely right about that, Tom, which is why I think Kyle is thinking the cleanest solution is to simply pull C2 from the table of uses. But I think what he is suggesting is that we put in the 6-month moratorium because that's our standard. He is thinking that we should be able to get this through a conversation with council, should be a relatively simple fix. So it's more about finding out what council wants, sending it to the planning board, coming back. He's thinking 3 months maximum. The other thing, at the same time as we held the public hearing on that, we would want to hold the public hearing on the fee schedule, which we really didn't want to get into before before we knew whether or not the public wanted Merrill to opt in or not. So now we know they want to opt in. Our fee schedule for site plan review and subdivision, all of those things would stay the same because they are not use dependent. However, our ordinance and state law provides for a special business license fee, annual fee for marijuana businesses. We are seeing the gamut from $205 a year all the way up to $15,000 a year. I will just suggest that the higher fees are probably going to end up having some issues when we go, if they get challenged in court. Whatever we come up with has to be based upon our cost of business. So I have asked the planning staff code to help determine what the actual costs associated with this are. And Dave Mylan, in his normal fashion, is coming through with all sorts of things we can add. So we will come to you kind of with a basis for a fine for a fee and ask you kind of a range and ask you to tell us where we should land. Hoping to do that. Oh, so go ahead.
And will we have some kind of a comparison as to what other municipalities are doing as well?
Absolutely. I think we'd look not only at our comparable size communities that have opted in, but also our our regional folks. So we had looked at Bangor. Councillor Perry reminded me that we should look at Old Town, which is our neighbor. So we'll take a look there, Brewer, just to see what they're charging.
Sure, thank you, Sophie.
My thought had been for the moratorium and the public hearing on the fee schedule that we would be looking hopefully at the 29th for short public hearings.
I would think doing some comparison with a college town would be informative as well.
Sophie, can you? Oh, I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead. Can you just explain to me, as a total newbie, a moratorium? So we put in place a 6-month moratorium. We are able to go through that process more quickly. The moratorium ends more quickly. If council doesn't reach a decision by that 6-month mark, then we either have to extend the moratorium again, or the law goes into effect as it stands. Okay, thank you. That was just a point of clarification.
Did you have anything else for us, Sophie?
If I do, my mind is so filled with those things right now. We are going to come together on Thursday for community development. That meeting has a continuation of the next step discussion on racial equity and justice. We have 2 proposals to move forward. I will put them both in the background for you guys. For folks who have not been part of council, if you have any questions about this work, I would encourage you to reach out to either someone on council or to me, because I think the hope is that this will be a decision-making meeting, correct, Councilor Perry?
That is correct.
So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about how the town wants to recognize Pride Month, and we have a proclamation for Juneteenth that we want to talk about because we would want that on the May agenda if we were going to adopt it. I think, and then I'll give you an update about the avenue. I think that's it, Councilor Grenier. Does that sound about right? I think we've given you enough work.
I think it's gonna be a fun night.
I'm
Can I
sure.
just ask what decision are you looking to, between the 2 proposals? What are those? Like I think I saw one proposal in a prior meeting, but so this is another proposal that we haven't seen.
So we talked quite a bit at our last regular meeting about the proposal that Megan Gardner had put together, and she had been our sort of lead person on this topic. And I think there was a lot of consensus around it. I think another counselor had some ideas of a different proposal, and we decided that the fair thing to do would be to look at both of them and make a decision. So
Okay, so this is a meeting for Thursday, and when are we going to get the other proposal?
So the other proposal came into me this afternoon. My hope is to get that packet out, if not tonight, tomorrow morning. That would be an all electronic packet, unless people request, and I can make copies and get them to folks.
And you're going to like I saw during the meeting, I watched Megan's proposal, but you're going to resend that as well?
Yeah, she has an email version that she sent to counselors. I have that. At least I think it's the last iteration of that. I will send that as well. So you'll get both of them. I would encourage the new counselors that weren't at that meeting to maybe take a few minutes, if you haven't already, and watch the meeting so that you she did a nice job with some background and kind of summing up what we've been doing to this point too. That would be helpful. But if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out. I would normally say to Councilor Gardner if you have questions about her proposal, but she's dealing with something now. I'm hoping that she'll be able to join us for part of Thursday. The other thing I would just say, just as a matter of housekeeping, when it comes to proposals like this, I think the idea is that we put ideas on the table, and counselors, as you discuss them, might come up with an idea that everybody kind of gathers around that might be a little different. So I don't think it's a straight up or down. It's not like an ordinance that you take it all or leave it all, I think. Am I right, Councilor Perry?
yes. Did you hear me? I think you were right on that comment.
So that's all I have. We've set Terry up well for Thursday. I will get packets out either tonight or tomorrow morning. And like I said, anybody has any questions, you know how to reach me, and I want to make sure you have the tools that you need to be able to participate.
Thank you, Sophie. If there is no other business that come before the council, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And let's just do it by a wave of hands.
Bye.
Bye. See everybody
Thank you.
Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.